Today I'm painting a watercolor bee. I usually start out with a pencil drawing. I don't want to draw in too much detail, just enough to see the different parts of the bee and a little bit of where the flower might be. Just getting in his legs and his wings here. The next thing I'm going to do is wet down part of my bee. I'm going to put water where I want the yellow fur to be. And I'm just going to dab that yellow in. And I'm also going to eventually dab in a slightly darker color, an orange or a yellow ochre, just to give that a little bit of variety. I'm using a smaller brush to apply that paint. I'm trying to get it to sit in the middle a little bit, which will create a mid-tone for our bumblebee and leave a highlight at the top. Now I'm just fanning out the water on the edges to help create the furry texture that the bee will have. The paint will go where the water is, so if I have little bits of water coming off, it should follow those bits of water and create some fur. Now I'm just laying in some of the flowers. This is a rather complicated flower. There's lots of little flowers in one flower, but I don't really want to go into too much detail with the flower. My focus is mostly on the bee. So I'm just going to use, right now I'm using yellow and yellow ochre to create a little bit of a shadow, and I'm trying to leave just a little bit of white for the highlight. And yeah, I just want to kind of imply the flowers down here as we go. I'll be jumping back and forth from the bee to the flower because I do want to give parts of this time to dry before going into the next steps. Now I'm just adding in another little flower in the background there. I'm trying to do darker colors where the center of the flower would be and lighter colors along the edge of the petals and the long neck of the flower. Now I'm just adding some water where I want the black part of the bee to be. I want this to be a very soft feeling texture. I want it to imply that there might be some fur on the bee. I don't want it to feel too shiny. I want it to feel very organic. So I'm just putting that water in first, and then I'm dabbing in Payne's Gray. I use Payne's Gray quite a bit in my watercolor paintings. Now the bee has a lot of black in it, so this step will be rather long. I'm still trying to strategically put the Payne's Gray where there's shadow, there under the wing. I'm putting it just above the wing to try to give the wing a little bit of definition. But I'm also letting some of my water go into the wing because a bee's wing is partially transparent. So you would be able to see the under part of the bee through the wing if you were to look directly at it. So I'm not being too careful about the wing. I do want a little bit of bleed there. And I don't mind a little bit of the black bleeding into the yellow either. I want to create a soft edge there because there is no hard edge on this bee. It's all very furry, it's all very soft. And it kind of flows together, the hair flows together from black to yellow. And then right at the bottom there's just a little bit of yellow and then it flows into kind of white. So I'm just going to pull a little bit of this color out to try to give that texture of fur that we have at the bottom of the bee without going too dark because we do want it to still look white. Just getting a little bit of color in there. Yeah, this bee, I'm just kind of jumping around on it. The bee is still wet, so I'm able to kind of layer in more and more black, and it should blend really nicely. Trying to leave a little bit of highlight every now and then. Just every time that your paint dries a little bit, it just looks a little bit lighter, so you have to keep going in and adding more and more layers. Now we get to do the head. The eye is actually, does have a hard edge to it. The eye is a shiny part of the bee, so we're going to treat the eye slightly differently. But the rest of the head is very much in line with what we've been doing. We also have to consider the feelers that the bee has. Those come out of the head, so I'm just kind of saving a spot for those as well. Now I get into the little shoulder of the bee, I guess you'd call it. It's where the wing attaches there. There's a little roundish, hard object there too. So I'm trying to create a little bit of an edge on that and give it a little bit of a highlight because it is shiny. I'm really bouncing around with this painting. It's not a very straightforward sort of a tutorial. I see a place that might need some work and I just go in there and throw some paint in, and the only thing that I'm really thinking about is this part wet, and if so, do I want it touching this other part that I'm putting in? And if not, then I come back to that area later. Like with these flowers, I didn't want the top of the flower to bleed into the bottom of the flower or vice versa. So I'm working on the inside section and the outside section at different times. But with the bee, I do want it to feel a little bit more blended. So even when the yellow was wet, I went ahead and added a little bit of that black because I didn't mind a little bit of that bleed. As I said before, I don't want these flowers to be too detailed. I just kind of want them to be a yellow texture that looks enough like a flower to communicate what it is, but I want the bee to be the standout object, so the detail should be in the bee instead of the flower. Now I get to throw in those legs. Again, the legs have a slightly different texture than the body. They still have fur on them, but they're also a solid shape that just has a little bit of fur rather than a big furry bee. So I'm treating those a little bit differently too. I'm putting in my Payne's Gray, pulling out a little bit and adding a little bit of orange, and then just again with a clean brush going in and pulling a little bit of that gray and the water out to create the fuzzy feeling that we have on the edge of the legs. Always going back in and layering in my black to try to get that bee to really pop, or I should say Payne's Gray. The colors I'm using in this are Payne's Gray, Yellow Ochre, Cadmium Red, which actually just looks like orange to me, and a warm yellow. I will eventually add just a teeny weeny bit of blue, and you'll see in the wing just a little tiny bit of purple. But other than that, it's mostly a yellow and black painting. I like my paintings to have minimal color, if at all possible. There I'm just feathering out those legs again, trying to get the texture of fur right on the edge. The bee's nose is actually in a flower, so we're not going to be able to see the rest of his face. He's busy getting some pollen. The flower is covering part of his face. Okay, time for the eye. So the eye has a pretty strong highlight on it, which we're going to leave mostly white, and then in the end we'll add a little bit of yellow from the flower to it. But I just added kind of a base layer highlight. We're going to eventually put more and more paint on there, but for now we just want like a light gray in the eye, and then we'll layer in more and more color on top of it. I'm doing the back feeler right now. It catches a little bit of light, so that feeler isn't very dark. The front one gets a little bit darker. I think it's probably in the shadow of the flower. We have to make sure that our flower is dry before we add that in there. Now going into the eye with a bit more color, trying to really make that reflection pop and to give a little bit of a reflection feel on the back of the eye too, as if the light is traveling through the eyeball. His front leg is quite small in comparison to the other ones. It almost acts more like a little arm than a leg. Adding some texture to that feeler, a little bit of hair to the leg there. I'm just filling in the bottom of the bee now with black. The black does kind of go along the entire base of the bee, and then just on the top do we see those yellow stripes that bees are so well known for. Now I'm putting in the wing. I'm just adding a very light Payne's Gray, and I'm actually dabbing a bit of that out. I just want the impression of a wing, but I don't want to go and make it too dark. So as I said, we want to communicate that it's a translucent wing. We don't want it to be a very heavy part of the bee. So I've gone and added some Payne's Gray to both. Now I'm just adding little bits of color. I like to think that the wings are able to pick up little bits of color around the painting, so that's where I'm adding some of my blue. I'm adding some more of the orangey red color, a little bit of yellow, and I'm just gonna let those wings dry and see what happens. They should be quite pretty though. In the end, I'll add a little bit of purple just to show the veins in the wing. Had a little bit of black on my page there I'm just trying to get rid of. Adding just a little bit more to the flowers. I'm adding in some more yellow texture to the background here. I want the flower to feel like it's sitting in a space with other flowers. I don't want it to be a standalone thing on a white background. And I'm also adding some splashes to the page just to break up that white background a little bit. I don't want the flower to stand out too much. As I said, I want the bee to be the star, and with just the two objects on the page, I feel like they're competing a little bit. So adding those splatters I feel like it pulls you back into the bee because of the colors that I use in the splatters. I'm using the Payne's Gray, a little bit of blue, so that'll tie you back into the bee and gives it kind of a nice playful feel. Now I'm just darkening that eye again, going in, over and over again with just a little bit more Payne's Gray each time, making it a little bit darker. I like the eye to be the darkest part of the bee and also the lightest part of the bee. That makes that eye a nice focal point. If I can kind of create that highlight and that shadow together. I mean, I guess the wing is the lightest part of the bee, but I'm creating a translucency there, so I don't think it communicates as being the lightest part of the bee. I think it just communicates as being a transparent part of the bee. There I am adding in my purple for the veins. I really like how this purple is looking actually. Just a little teeny bit here and there, just tiny little fine lines with a very fine brush. And I'm putting a little bit more along the edge because there would be a little bit more of a shadow or color along the edge of the wing. You'd see a little bit more there. Just adding a little bit more to the butt now. Bumblebees are so cute. I had to wait on that top wing because it wasn't dry yet, and I don't like to use a hairdryer unless I have to. I prefer to let my paint dry naturally. Sometimes if you use a hairdryer, your something that you've been working on can kind of move on you, and just let it dry naturally. You don't run into that problem as much. I think these little veins were my favorite part of this painting. I've never painted a bee before. I've been teaching a lot lately, and I'm trying to learn new things, and so in my spare time when I'm not teaching, I'm actually doing a lot of art, just trying to teach myself different skills. And I really wanted to learn how to paint a bee. I've been painting bees with acrylic for a while, but I really like watercolor, and I want to try to push myself to be a better watercolor artist. So when I get a chance, I like to do a little bit of experimenting. And so for me, this is a bit of an experiment, but it's an educated experiment. I do understand enough about watercolor to be able to kind of give a play-by-play and go through the motions. And I have noticed myself improving over time here, which is really nice and rewarding. The more you do, the more you improve, right? I think this bee is turning out nicely, though. I'm getting the fuzzy texture that I was hoping for. The wing translucency really comes forward, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. And there you go. There's our watercolor bee. Thank you for joining me today. And if you happen to paint a bee yourself, I'd love to see your artwork. You can tag me in it on Instagram at Creations by Kendra. And if you're interested in taking art lessons, you can email me at kendramalcolm at yahoo.com.